Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Charlotte here, and in today's video I'm going to be making a very clean and simple card with some stenciling, and then I'm going to be adding some coloured pencil detail to that stenciling just to add a little bit more interest to the card. I'm starting off with a Build a Rose stencil from STAMPlorations, and as always I will have all the products I have used linked in the description box below this video on YouTube, or if you're watching on my blog then all the products are linked in the text of the blog post. I'm using Frayed leaf ink from Altenew to start stenciling my stem and leaves of my flower, which I have positioned directly onto the lower right hand corner of my card base. This is an A2 card base and it's made of Neenah Solar White 110 pound cardstock, which is a nice heavyweight cardstock. Once I've finished going over the image with the frayed leaf, which is quite a light green, I'm going to go over it again, and I'm using a slightly darker ink this time, which is Forest Glades ink, and I'm just adding that into select places, so the lower edges of the leaves and a little bit on the top of the stem as well, because there would be some shadow where the flower head is over the top of that. So I'm just adding a little shading and detail with this second colour. I didn't mask off around the stem at all, which in hindsight probably would have been a good idea because I did go over the edge very slightly and I got a smudge of green on the edge of my card base. It's a fairly easy fix though. I just had to find my sand razor and run over that little bit of green with the sand razor, and that cleaned it up nicely. Once I've got that nice and clean, I'll move on to doing the top of my flower. So I'll bring the stencil back in and position it over the top so that the bud of the flower that I've chosen, there are 3 different ones you can choose on the stencil, but I made sure the one I wanted to use was in the correct position, and learning from my previous mistake, I did use some bits of post-it tape around the image just to make sure I'm not going to be going over the edges anywhere. Here I'm using some more Altenew inks. I started with Frosty Pink, which is a very pale pink colour. I then used Coral Berry as my mid-tone, and I'm going to actually use 3 colours for this, where I used 2 for the stems and the leaves. So once I've got that mid-tone in, I will go in again with just a touch of the ruby red, just to really deepen up the shadow areas. With this small image, it would probably be easier to work with finger daubers, for example, rather than this kind of blending tool that I'm using. Or alternatively, if you have the blending brushes or makeup brushes that are a popular choice at the moment, using one of the very small brushes from the set would work well for getting into those smaller areas, especially when adding this shading in. But I managed to get a coverage I was happy with just with these blending tools, so it is possible to make it work even if you don't have all the equipment that you might prefer to have. Having finished all the stenciling, I'm going to go in with some pencils. These are actually watercolour pencils just because they're the best pencils I have at the moment. I'm not going to activate them, so I'm effectively just using them as coloured pencils here. I've picked out colours that match quite well with the colours of the inks I've used, and I'm first adding lines to the edges of my stenciling. I'm not outlining the whole thing, I'm just doing it on one side of each element just to add a little bit more definition to the design. So I did that first to the stems and the leaves, and then I will do the same to the flower bud. And you do want to make sure your pencils have a nice sharp point on them when you're doing this. Again, with the flower bud, I'm just carefully drawing around the edge. I kept this outlining primarily on the left hand side of each of the elements and just defining the line a bit more. After finishing the outlining, I decided to add a little bit more detail to the leaves, so I'm going and with the green pencil again, I'm going to very lightly draw in some veins to the leaves. If you look at a leaf in real life, it will have lines on it, so I thought I would add those to my stenciled leaves as well, just to make them look a bit more realistic. Not that they're particularly realistic, of course. I wasn't going for extremely realistic look on this card. I'm nowhere near good enough at drawing to do that, but I just thought it would add some interest to the stenciled image. And I will add that into each of the 3 leaves. And then I decided to use the pencils as well to add more shading to the image. So where I'd added shading with the different colours of inks, I'm now going to go in and add shading with the pencils. So I'm using the ink shading as a guideline and starting at the base of the leaves and just kind of flicking the colour in from the base towards the tip. I also do the same on the tiny leaves that are clustered below the flower itself, and I did try and add a little bit to the stem, but it's very narrow, so there's not a lot really that you can do there. I also decided to bring in a lighter shade of green, and I used that to add some colouring and detail onto the highlighted areas of the leaves, just to add a bit more detail there as well. And having the highlights and shadows really helps to give the leaf some dimension and make it look less flat than it might otherwise if you're just simply stenciling the design. Next, I'm going to repeat the process with the head of the flower using a variety of pinks. Again, I'm going to go in from the bottom first and add in some shading to those shadow areas that I had created. And again, I'm keeping it quite simple, but just allowing the pencil detail to add some depth to that colour. I then bring in a lighter pink pencil, and after making sure that it's nice and sharp, I'm going to use that to add detail to the highlight areas. So it's exactly the same process as what I had done on the leaves. It also helps me to crisp up those lines even more if there are any areas that it's not quite how I want it. Once I was happy with how the rose looked, I moved the card base into my MISTI and stamped my sentiment, which is from an Altenew stamp set. And I used Versafine Onyx black ink for the stamping, which gives a nice crisp black impression. Unfortunately, I realised after stamping that there was some lint or something on my stamp, and it stamped quite messily. Actually, you can't really see it in the video, but in real life I could see it really clearly. So rather than starting over, which I do not like to do, I took a white gel pen and carefully dotted the gel pen over those areas of black where the stamp had stamped badly, and just covered those up with the white gel pen to make them less obvious and make the sentiment tidier. And that's one approach to fixing a sentiment that stamps messily like that, if it's not too terribly messy. As a final touch, I decided to add a trio of Nuvo drops to my card, and I'm using bottle green Nuvo drops, which have a nice sheen to them. And I just added 3 of those around my image. And that completes my very clean and simple feminine birthday card using stenciling and just a touch of pencil colouring to add detail to that stenciled design. I hope you enjoyed this video and perhaps you learned something new from it. If you did, please press the like button to let me know. If you didn't enjoy it, feel free to press the dislike button. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below if you have any questions or anything you'd like to say about this card. Let me know if you have yourself added detail to stencils in this way, or if you have a different approach for using your stencils. And you could also let me know if there's something in particular that you'd like to see in my upcoming videos. I'm always open to suggestions. If you're not yet a subscriber, feel free to press the subscribe button that's on screen now to make sure you see my future videos. There are also a couple of other videos showing on screen at the moment if you'd like to see something from me straight away. Otherwise, I'll thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!